Well, everybody, welcome to Seven Foundation conversation with Hilary Roberts. We're very pleased to be here and proud to be partnering with Photo Wings on this conversation, as we are doing with all our conversations. And this will be proving to be a very timely and important conversation. Hilary Roberts, those of you that don't know, although you should all know who she is, former curator at the Imperial War Museum, now an independent curator, specialist in the history and practice of conflict photography, which of course is dear to my heart and many of us at Seven. Hillary's collaborated with photographers and artists and curators, researchers and writers who engage with images of historic and contemporary conflict in every region of the world. She has come out with a new book called The Camera at War. Let's hold it up here. It's a beautiful book. Well, you can't see it. Sorry, my face is, sorry. Anyway, sorry about that. Camera at War, 170 years of weaponizing photography. There will be a link for you to go and check it out, to buy it. It's well worth it. It's truly not only a history of what our world of photography has been like, but also brings us up into current day, which is incredibly important. And those of you that are paying attention even now to the conflict occurring between the United States, Israel, and Iran should be very well aware of the veracity and value of the veracity of imagery, the conversations about imagery that is being manipulated for political reasons, for financial reasons, for social media reasons, and so on. This is just some of the things that Hilary touches upon in her study of the history of photography, again, bringing us all the way up to today, until the world of AI. So it gives me great pleasure and honor to hand this over to Hilary Roberts, who will talk a little bit about why she did this book and why we should all be paying attention and learn from it. Hilary, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here, and thank you to the Seven Foundation and Photo Wings for supporting this broadcast. I thought I'd start off by introducing the book and what it's all about. It's an overview of the history of photo manipulation applied to conflict photography from the very first time that cameras went onto the battlefield during the Crimean War, and coming right up to 2025, during which time we were dealing with the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, elsewhere, but not, unfortunately, this year's events. However, I think I may need to write an appendix rather sooner than I thought, given the way that events have unfolded in recent weeks. The book is produced in collaboration with my former institution, the Imperial War Museums, but it includes images which have been sourced from all around the world, archives, personal collections, photographers, and I'm deeply grateful to everybody who helped me put it together, because it was an amazing project and a complex one to actually put together. So I'd like to start by just showing you a few images, some case studies, if you will, from the book. And this is the way in which people are most familiar with the manipulation of photographs, misattribution. By that, I mean the alteration, manipulation of the text that accompanies a photograph. Now, at the start of my career, I always considered a photograph to consist of three elements. One would be the negative that came out of the camera. The next would be the print or prints, which were produced from it. And the third element would be the caption. And in the context of conflict photography, you couldn't really have one element without the others. If you did, then you had a photograph which was of very limited significance. This photograph, taken by William Ivor Castle, who was working as an official photographer for the Canadian Army on the Western Front in the First World War, was published at the time with the caption that you see there: "The Canadian battalion goes over the top." But the date was not given. And Castle himself, in subsequent exhibitions, presented it as various identifications. So at one time it was explained that it was British troops going into action. On another occasion, it was the Battle of the Somme. But in fact, it was a training exercise. And in order to actually make sure that you could see that, what you needed to look at the photograph very closely, and the rifle on the extreme right of the picture, when you look at it closely, you can see that it has what's known as the breech cover on. In other words, a cloth cover to protect the firing mechanism. And that meant that there is no way that that rifle could actually be used in battle. So that was a visual clue. And then researching the history of the photograph then revealed the truth. But for many, many years, this photograph, because of its caption, has been regarded as one of the few genuine moments of troops going into battle on the Western Front during the First World War. Next slide, please. But it's not just words that can be manipulated when it comes to a photograph. On the left here, you see a darkroom guide print of a Magnum photograph. The photograph by Leonard Freed, annotated by Pablo Inerio. And in that is a documentary record of all the dodging and burning and sort of techniques used in the darkroom to print the negative for the desired effect. And darkroom techniques of manipulation have been really with us since the advent of photography. Today, of course, we now use digital processing software, digital image processing software to do this. Accompanying it is a quote from the renowned photographer Edward Steichen, who wrote an essay called Ye Fakers as long ago as 1903, in which he said, in fact, every photograph is a fake from start to finish, and an unmanipulated photograph being practically impossible. And basically what he was meaning by that was that the choices that were made at every stage of the photograph's creation, where to set up your camera, how to compose the image, what kind of exposure, whether it's going to be a landscape or a portrait shot, anything and everything went into the creation of an image was a form of manipulation, and that's before any further interventions into the captured image itself began. Next slide, please. Now, the end of that particular essay, way back in 1903, seems remarkably prescient today. I'll just read it out loud for you. "Someday," Steichen wrote, "there may be invented a machine that will discriminatingly select its subject, and by means of a skillful arrangement of springs and screws, compose its motif, expose the plate, develop, print, and even mount and frame the result of its excursion, so that there will remain nothing for us to do but to send it to the Royal Photographic Society's exhibition and gratefully receive the Royal Medal." And we now have synthetic imaging, otherwise known as generative AI. And this image, which was produced by a Ukrainian shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine began, was one of the first examples of synthetic AI-generated image being circulated by a major image agency, Adobe Stock. And it was quite a controversial thing at the time. And now, of course, many photo agencies who not only disseminate stock images, but also news images, also channel AI images. Next slide, please. Now, this image, the before and after, which was taken by Fyodor Kislov in Moscow, is one of the best known 20th century examples of photo manipulation. You have Stalin in front of the recently opened Moscow-Volga Canal, and alongside Molotov, and also the perpetrator of many of Stalin's purges, Nikolai Yaremov. Now, Nikolai had a very, very short career, and very soon after the photograph on the left was taken, he fell from favor, was removed from his post, and eventually was executed. And Stalin wanted to remove all traces from him of his association with him, and so Yaremov was airbrushed out of the photograph. Now, the retouching of photographs were pretty much standard practice in the Soviet Union under Stalin, for propaganda and political control. This was a blatant act of political censorship, but the photograph has had a life since the 1930s because it inspired a book by David King, The Commissar Vanishes, which appeared just as digital technology and Adobe Photoshop's image processing software was being rolled out. And this was perhaps the start of a new wake-up call in terms of the history of manipulated photography and awareness raising of the potential of photographs not to tell the truth. Next image, please. So within the book, I outline in various chapters what the principal photo manipulation techniques actually are or have been over time, and what their consequences can be. And it could be summarized in three ways: adding meaning to a picture, removing meaning to a picture, or changing the meaning, by which I mean distorting it. And of course, arguably the first two are all elements of the third, but I think it is necessary to break it down a little further. And the techniques: color, the making of composite images, annotating images, interventions on the mounts of images, cropping photographs, censorship, retouching, attribution, we've already had a look at in terms of captioning, posing, staging, reenactment, and construction. These have really been a part of photography's history almost since the beginning, and certainly, definitely, since the beginning of conflict photography. Next slide, please. So this here is the oldest photograph in the book on the left, and one of the most recent ones on the right. Sathmari, sort of one of Romania's most important photographers, was the first photographer to document the war in the Crimea. Most of his archive was destroyed in the Second World War, and so he is less well known for this work than Roger Fenton is. However, this is a rare survivor from the collection of George Eastman House, and the point about it is the fragility of the photographic process that's being used here. So this is a salted paper print, and these prints were exceedingly fragile. From the point that they came out of the darkroom, they began to fade away. A British photographer whose photographs predated Fenton in the Crimea, his work has been entirely lost and therefore forgotten, because there was no way of preventing the salted paper prints from actually fading away. This one, a retoucher, possibly Sathmari himself, has actually overpainted the image to try and preserve its detail. And so when you look at it, you can see that the original elements of the photograph are still there, but they are very, very faint. And in the foreground are two horses. And at this point in time, it's not actually possible to work out whether those horses were in the original photograph or not. On the right, you have what AI can do. This particular image, All Eyes on Rafa 2024, not a photograph, but obviously AI images are created by what's known as scraping from data which is already published online, including images and photographs. This one actually broke the internet in May 2024. In May 2024, there was an Israeli air raid which caused many casualties in a refugee camp in Rafah in Gaza. And the attack caused such outrage around the world that within 24 hours, it was shared more than 40 million times on social media. So synthetic imaging, generative AI imaging, does have power, even when, as in this particular case, it does not aspire to show reality. Images today of this nature can look incredibly realistic. You have to look at them very closely to spot telltale details. They're getting better all the time. This one, no pretensions to convey reality, but what it does do is epitomize and encapsulate a moment in time, which resonated around the world. Next, please. Much manipulation in the 19th century was driven by the limitations of photographic technology, but the profit motive and personal ambition were also incentives. And this one, a very well-known example, showing General Grant at City Point, United States, allegedly during the American Civil War. And of course, it's actually nothing of the sort. It's a construct. It consists of 3 separate photographs taken by different photographers, and was created long after the war itself by a relative. Levin Corbin Handy was related by marriage to Matthew Brady, and he put this photograph together probably to trade on Civil War nostalgia. It was certainly very popular. Research by the US Library of Congress has managed to piece together what is in fact a jigsaw puzzle. None of the photographs used for this image, in fact, show City Point. They were all taken at different locations. So the only authentic little bit about it is Ulysses Grant's face. It's not his horse. These are not his troops in the background, and it's not City Point. Next slide, please. This is a British example called the Gate of Goodbye. It was created during the First World War. Every single figure that you see in this image was photographed separately in the artist's studio. His wife features several times in the image, but the scene that it actually depicts, there is artistic truth in that, because this was a scene that played out at this time at London's Victoria Station, day after day after day. Hundreds and thousands of troops flooding through Victoria Station terminus arch to get on the troop trains to France. And most people who saw it at the time related to it, bonded with it, bought copies of it, and the press actually reproduced it several times as an authentic image. Next slide, please. Color was another way of overcoming the limitations of technology in the 19th century and early 20th century, even when sort of true color technology became available. So overpainting, hand tinting, coloring images using a variety of dyes and printing processes were all used to try and capture the reality of the scene as the photographer had perceived it. Now, India had a slightly different take on this, because their love of color, bright color, and their traditions in portrait painting meant that for them, the photographic image was of less appeal. What they wanted was a photorealistic portrait which resembled a painting. And therefore, the imaging that was colorized by Indian colorists at this time often sort of obscured any element of the photograph's tonality, and of course much depended on the colorist's understanding of what the color palette actually should be. There was no guarantee of accuracy there. On the right, this is a hand-tinted image by an ordinary soldier who was based in Egypt but had a fairly quiet war. And he had the ability not only to take photographs with a personal camera, but also to colorize them. Those photographs that he considered particularly important were the ones that he spent most time with. And this is an example of what he clearly saw was an interesting moment, and therefore he spent time colorizing it in an effort to make it more realistic. Next slide, please. Digital technology. Well, in the first few years of the 21st century, photographers were playing around with what Adobe Photoshop could offer them. And this particular image, taken by Giles Penfound, was taken on a British commuter train into London the day after the terrorist attacks. So on that, you might remember, sort of 7th of July 2005, bombers detonated bombs on several tube trains in the morning rush hour, and another one on a London bus. Many, many people were killed or badly injured. It was a traumatic incident, and Britain's first experience of this kind of attack. Now, the following day, very few people were traveling by train. And here we have a lone traveler going into his office. And the photographer has used a Photoshop to desaturate most of the image, creating a sort of somber monochromatic aesthetic. But the front page of the newspaper in the foreground, he has left in full color, highlighting the context and the subject matter. And in the UK, this photograph has resonated greatly with many Londoners since it was taken. Next, please. Censorship is a subject all of its own. Censorship of the image, censorship of the accompanying information. But cropping is also a part of, or can be a part of, censorship. And in this case, this is a Second World War image taken during the London Blitz, or 1943, in fact, when a German bomb hit the major post office hub in London. Now, it was a major disaster. In this case, the censor has insisted that the majority of the photograph be cropped out, and he's completely transformed the scene from one of disaster recovery into one of a man going about a routine daily work. Next, please. Now, the photographs of flags on the battlefield have an importance, a gravitas, an emotive appeal, a symbolism, all of their own. And the question of their authenticity and whether they have been staged or manipulated in any way has triggered so much sort of analysis and history that it's hard to put a figure on how much has been examined. This image by Joe Rosenthal, one of the most iconic American images of the Second World War. It was actually a reenactment of a scene that had taken place earlier in the day. A flag had been erected. It was deemed not to be big enough, and so this group of Marines were tasked with putting up a bigger one. Now, Rosenthal didn't intervene in this at all, but the question of whether it was a staged photograph, staged scene for the camera or not, has exercised historians. Corroborative evidence, including cinefilm and the work of another photographer who was present, has absolutely validated the claim, the assertion that it's a genuine event. But again, the photograph in some ways has become misleading over time, not through any action of the photographer. And it's a reminder that when it comes to manipulation, there are many people involved, and the photographer may have no awareness of what is happening to their work. But Rosenthal's photograph was seen by many at the time as a signal that Iwo Jima had been captured and that the war in the Pacific was nearing its end. And in fact, the flag went up only 4 days after Marines landed on Iwo Jima. They had a whole month of savage fighting to get through before Iwo Jima was under American control. And the end of the war, obviously, was months away at this point in time. So the sort of understanding and exploitation of the photograph as a symbol of victory was problematic even at the time of its release, its initial publication. And in subsequent years, it's been argued, there was an article in 2020 in Time magazine sort of saying that this image has become so decontextualized that it's become more symbolic of an assertion of American values than of the event and the actual event at Okinawa itself. That is a debatable subject, but there's no doubt that this photograph has inspired many, many other photographers to stage manage a scene, which sort of evokes it. Next photograph. And one of the first was Yevgeny Koldai, who saw Rosenthal's photograph and wanted his own version. So he commissioned a flag to be made in Moscow, and he took it with him as Soviet forces advanced towards Berlin. And then he staged this event on the roof of the Reichstag. Now, it's important to remember that reenactment and staging are actually two separate concepts. Reenactment is the recreation of an event that genuinely happened. Staging is a creation of an event which has no actual basis in no previous event. So staged battle scenes, for example, versus reenactment of battle scenes, they are two different things, and they can have significant variations in accuracy and meaning. However, not only did Koldai stage this photograph, which he was quite happy to do, but it was also subsequently retouched, and the version on the right shows the retouching. More smoke was added to suggest burning fires, to make the image more dramatic, and it was also retouched to remove evidence of possible looting by the soldiers in the foreground. So there is one officer who is wearing a wristwatch on each hand, and the editor of TASS insisted that that be taken out so that Soviet troops could not be accused of looting. Next image, please. Just a couple of more recent examples to conclude. The Fayko family photograph, which Ron published in his Balkan War Journal series, Blood and Honey, the Fayko family, in which this family photograph was defaced by Serb troops who had confiscated the family's home. They used a drill bit to obliterate the faces of the family and also to put them, figuratively speaking, behind bars. This is a form of weaponization. It was intended as an intimidation technique for the family when they returned to the property after the Serbs had been forced to leave it. It's a very threatening image. I would hate to have experienced something like this myself. And an example of self-censorship on the right by British photographer Edmund Clark from his Extraordinary Rendition series. Now, Edmund Clark was engaged in compiling a body of work which sought to convey the minutiae of the CIA's Extraordinary Rendition program, in which people suspected of terrorist-related activities were abducted and transported by civilian aircraft to black sites for interrogation or to Guantanamo Bay. This is a photograph of one of the civilian pilots' personal house, and the photographer has opted to pixelate the house to self-censor the image because, of course, that the photographer is entitled to their privacy. And so censorship can have all sorts of ramifications and meanings. So that is pretty much a very quick run through of some examples from the book, and perhaps we can end it there. Okay, so I've forgotten this one. Sorry, I beg your pardon. This is not in the book, which is why I'd forgotten about it. But this is an image which would have been in the book had I been able to secure permissions in time. And I just included it to try and show the positive side of AI technology. So this is a composite image produced from satellite photographs of Chernihiv in Ukraine, and AI has been used to do what they call a rapid damage building assessment. And the aim is to sort of show how bad the damage of the Russian assault on Chernihiv actually was in April 22. The result of this image was that the United Nations agreed that in this particular case, the Russian forces had targeted civilian homes above all else, and that this constituted a war crime. And so this photograph, despite, although AI was involved in its production, is evidence of a war crime, and hopefully will serve as that in due course. I think that's probably it. Yeah, that's it. So that's what the book looks like. And yes, I hope you have a chance to have a look and enjoy it if you see it.
Thank you so much, Hilary. I think we're just having a little bit of a connection issue with Ron at the moment. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you a question whilst we wait for him to rejoin. Can you tell us why you chose to write this book today?
Well, I've wanted to write the book for a long time. The subject, sort of the relationship between truth and conflict photography and photo manipulation, has been a constant thread running through my career. But it was definitely the case about 5+ years ago that the question of the authenticity and believability of photography, photographs produced for different purposes, was being called into question more than ever before. And in the context of conflict particularly, whether such photographs could ever be trusted. And so it seemed to me that really from the late, post-COVID, the believability of conflict photographs, public trust in them had been seriously shaken. And so as I already felt that this project was gaining in importance and proposed it. And then events in Ukraine and Gaza happened, and it became, in my head, critical to actually write this book, because I was listening to many discussions of photographs, whether they could be trusted, accusations of manipulation, accusations of fake news, undermining of photojournalists, but equally denigration of work by artists, photographers who create work as art, which can have can offer a greater photographic truth sometimes. So that's why I argued that the book was important, and I'm glad that my collaborators in the project agreed. I should say I couldn't have done it without the support of photographers and curators around the world.
I'm sure. I think that's interesting what you say about, there was a place perhaps for artistic or creative interpretations within, the representation of conflict. Do you feel that perhaps, and your example of Rafa is maybe pertinent to this point, do you feel that perhaps AI imagery has a constructive or positive role to play within this sort of documentation of conflict? Or
I think it can do. I think so much depends on the context and the transparency, the motivation. So I feel that as has always been the case in photography, imagery has an immense power to draw attention. A still image can hook itself into your brain in seconds, and it will stay there. In a way, perhaps that footage, video, cannot. So if you see a piece of footage, you can sort of remember it, but if you see a still image which connects to that footage, you recall is much easier. I think the power of the visual image to imprint itself and generate a response, an emotional response, but also to provide evidence, trigger questions, cannot be underestimated in the field of conflict photography. And with conflict photography, I think as long as there is an ethical approach and openness and honesty about what has been done and why, it can be added to the tools in the box. Deceiving people on subjects such as this, I think, remains completely unacceptable. What that does is it means that you are no more than a propagandist. You're creating propaganda. It may be that is the point, but if you manipulate people's knowledge and emotions, by and large, nowadays they are very unforgiving.
And unfortunately, these issues are becoming more and more prevalent. And the context in which we view images has rapidly changed and continues to change. And that makes understanding the context of the image so much harder. So it's a very difficult time.
I think we all have a responsibility. So the creators of the image, those that work on the image, those that publish or disseminate the image, curators have a responsibility. And I would also argue that consumers have a responsibility. So they need to really think about what they are looking at. Many of the most potent images on social media are framed to evoke an emotional response. They're also framed to work on a small screen. And so, the immediate thing is to prompt somebody to laugh or to cry. Anger is a great motivator. And people have to sort of just take a moment to think because there are various forms of, there's misinformation, which is circulating information unintentionally, sort of wrong, incorrect information unintentionally. There is disinformation, where you're doing it deliberately. And then there is malinformation, where you have a malicious motivation to actually circulate incorrect information. And so it is really, really important in photography and in other media forms to actually take the time, particularly on social media, particularly in today's polarized and somewhat partisan media world that we are living in now, to take the time and just sort of say, okay, what's the context here? How can I validate what I'm looking at? Is this real? And so, I think we all owe it to ourselves to actually understand a little bit more about image manipulation. And that applies to video as well. And not sort of rely solely on editors or the photographers themselves. The photographers, photojournalists have an ethical framework that they work to. Editors, likewise, but ultimately, the consumers also have a role to play in what happens next.
Absolutely, and educators as well. Really important.
Absolutely. This is why we're here tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Hilary. I suggest we maybe take a few questions from the audience. So I'll bring a few up on the screen if you don't mind, and we'll start getting through some of the questions. So the first one from James Peskett. Is there a special relationship between war, conflict, and truth that transcends other forms of journalism and reporting?
That's a very interesting question, isn't it? I would argue that any form of conflict shapes lives. It shapes the lives of those who are caught up in it, those who are sort of living alongside it. But it also continues to reverberate through the generations. We are still living with the consequences of the First World War. Some of the conflicts that we are dealing with today, you could say, can trace their links right back to the First World War. And because the consequences of war and conflict can be so so important. People really want to understand what is happening. So they want to understand events. They want to have a handle on what the potential consequences might be. And I'd take you back to the First World War again, because prior to the First World War, photography was becoming a mass medium of communication. In other words, for the first time, it was possible to see images of the conflict in your newspapers and magazines on a big scale. But up until that point, the photographic technology, camera technology, and the very small number of professional photojournalists who were able to work in the field during the First World War meant that there was often a shortage of supply. And so photographs were often misrepresented. In other words, they were symbolic of events rather than showing the actual events themselves. And it was during the First World War that the concept of documentary truth in photography first established itself as of overwhelming importance when it comes to conflict photography. Consumers objected when photographs did not show what they claimed they showed. The authorities were forced into a number of embarrassing changes of their claims. Gallipoli was an important point on that. The kind of photograph that I showed you at the outset of the presentation of the Canadians going over the top, that was a rare instance of faking, as it was known then. So, and what was interesting was that all the other photographers who were working on the Western Front were outraged by the fact that Castle did it. So I think there is a relationship, a special relationship between war, conflict, and truth. And people demand to know, just as we want to know the endless hours of news coverage of what's happening in Iran right now. We want to know what's happening because we are on the edge of a precipice. So yeah, I think there is a special relationship. And I would add there's a special relationship between war, conflict, photography, and truth.
Do you think that the average person understands, the word objective is often used in conjunction with photography as a representative. This is objective, so therefore it's the truth, and so on, without even taking into, obviously, the photography itself by its very nature is subjective. We, as the photographer, choose where to point the camera, when to press the button, 250th second, and so on. So, do you think it's built into the audience to actually, because we've all grown up as we actually understand that, or we as photographers and providers of content and editors and so on just take it for granted that the audience understands that, but in actuality doesn't really,
I think the picture is very mixed. I think there is a question as to whether any journalist can be truly objective about the scenes that they are witnessing, because you're human beings. But so much depends on why the photographer is doing what they're doing. I would say that the public understands the limitations of claims to be objective better now than they have ever done in the past. But I think that the pendulum swings wildly still between those who trust absolutely what they see and those that are completely, hard-bitten cynics. The biggest problem, I think, actually, in most recent years, is this business whereby, because of the consumption of a great deal of news via social media and the application of algorithms to the feed that you actually see, including articles that mainstream news media think you may be interested in, this all ends up reinforcing a preconception, which may in fact not be the case. So I am concerned about the way in which algorithms feed you things that might affirm what you want to believe, as opposed to feeding you material which might help you contextualize or critique what you believe. So there's quite a lot to say. I mean, one thing I would there is one example of I heard the other day of a Ukrainian photographer who, prior to 2022, was working as a photojournalist and an artist, developing his practice in both fields, as it were. And he had autonomy, and he had the potential to approach things in a more neutral frame than after 2022. After 2022, he joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and he is now a military photographer. And of course, that's representing a perspective. There is no possibility of being objective in that environment. You are there to generate material which shows things from the Ukrainian point of view. You are not there to falsify stories, but it is not an objective perspective. So he was acknowledging that because of circumstances, he was no longer able to make even the slightest claim to being objective in his coverage of the situation in Ukraine. And this is indeed what happened with many press photographers in the two world wars. Certainly in Europe and the UK, and eventually in the United States, their status changed. So they moved from being reporters and observers to being participants, and they moved from generating news to generating propaganda in support of the war aims of the time. So one of the things that I found throughout my career is that when you are assessing a photographer's life and work, you really have to sort of say, well, okay, what was he or she doing at this point in time, and what was driving their train? And so context, motivation, and it's often the case that some great documentary photographers who cover conflict are assessed with the assumption that they have autonomy in the access that they have and the stories that they cover. And in the case of the two world wars, this was not the case. So somebody like Lee Miller, who was working as a photojournalist for the United States forces in France in 1944, her work was not objective. It was as objective as she could produce under the circumstances, but she had to abide by all the constraints that were imposed on war correspondents at the time.
There's so many questions that come out of what you just said. There's so many places to go. But let's just pick up just on this, also given the film and so on, about Lee Miller, because when you look at her work today and you see it in various places, there's no parentheses, asterisk, anything stating what you just said. It's put out there as if it's exactly like, and everybody, there's other stories about other photographers and so on, but it's what Kappa did, it's what everybody did during that time, and it's not. So it's really fascinating. So much of this is about our, as the audience, our education, not only in the history of photography, but just in kind of this broader media literacy. And my question is now, especially given the onslaught, every year more than 1 trillion images are being taken now. And we're not obviously being exposed to all of them, but certainly it feels like it sometimes, but certainly quite a lot. What is our responsibility as an audience to understand what we're looking at?
I think, as I said before, that we have a responsibility to learn to ourselves as well as to those that we come into contact with and wish to share imagery with. We have a responsibility to equip ourselves with the skills, and these skills are not that difficult to acquire, but to take the time to look at images properly, question them, and know what questions to ask. I mean, doing something as simple as a reverse image search, everybody can who has access to Google can do a reverse image search to see whether something is what it claims to be. But I do think that more could be done to help people know how to look at photographs and analyze the visual elements, but also contextualize them. So one of the problems about today's access to media is so much of it is sort of remote. In other words, the ability to see the physical artifact, the physical photograph, the original print, the original negative for historic photographs, the ability to actually have a look at what came out of the photographer's camera, their contact sheets and so forth. These assets are not as accessible today as we would like them to be. Their digital surrogates are accessible. So, for example, if you wanted to look at Life magazine's vintage photographs by Margaret Bourke-White or Robert Capa or something like that, they're down a salt mine. They're not easy to see, but what you can see is what has been digitized and is online. When I was preparing this book, one of the challenges was that some of the forms of manipulation you couldn't physically make out. You couldn't see them on the screen because the digitization standards were not good enough to actually really drill down and look at the detail. And it is so much of manipulation can be spotted if you can see the detail. But there are many, many other factors as well.
Also you can see the original, right? If you don't see, if you never, so like the migrant mother, Dorothea Lange photograph, most people don't know that there's a thumb missing out of the photo.
Yeah, exactly that. The other element to this subject is that often photographs which have been heavily manipulated, particularly conflict photographs, heavily manipulated, retouched, or whatever. This is not, up till now, this has not been consistently documented in the cataloguing of digital archives. So you have typically, if you're interrogating an online database, you often have a description of the subject. You may have a description of the fact that it's a print, but what you don't necessarily have is whether it's been retouched or colorized or manipulated in some, airbrushed in some way, shape or form. That has not up till now been a priority because people haven't seen it as important. But I would argue now that having the ability to actually sort of look at things properly, to actually have a degree of understanding of visual literacy, to have the confidence to understand what the terminology is, sort of what is an algorithm? Where's that term come from? What does it mean? And to use those terms consistently so that you can have a reasonable conversation with people. I think it's terribly important, and I would love to see it form a significant part of photography degrees and the education of young photographers today, having a sense of how photography got to where it is now. The history. If you don't know the history, how can you really engage with the present? The fact is that manipulation of photographs has been with us really since the beginning. It continues to be a significant factor in our lives. We need to pay attention to it.
Do you have much hope with what it's doing with content authenticity initiative? Did you hear that? The CAI?
Yes, yeah. It's another tool in the box. I think anything which helps support the integrity of journalists and provide and enhance trust is to be celebrated. But you cannot rely on it. It's not. I mean, it was never, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Its main purpose is to show the history of the image, sort of who created it, when, and so forth. It's not. It doesn't actually tell you whether the image that was created was real in the first place.
No, it still relies on the integrity of the photographer for the initial thing, which is obviously a key issue.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so, my concern there is that those with a strong understanding of the importance of ethics and how an ethical approach to journalism supports and enhances the authority of the reporting. Those people will use this system. Those that don't share that view, that outlook, will not. So I think it's another useful tool. I think every effort needs to be made to help the public have faith in photojournalism, and also to have. What worries me is this sort of trend towards choosing to disbelieve photographs simply because you don't like what they show. That I want to find some way of turning that oil tanker around.
Yeah, well, that will, as with an oil tanker, that will take quite a while and quite some effort, but it's certainly well worth it. Yeah, for sure. Just going back to the previous comments you were making, I don't know if you were following the story about the mass grave photograph from Iran that was being done for the children, and how both, I think it was Grok and Gemini, two different AI programs that actually said, with coming up with various reasons of what the original image was, that it was that was not from Iran. That one said it was from Turkey from X years. The other one said it was from somewhere else, and both AI programs were incorrect. And it's okay. I think the Guardian was the one who really broke the story and actually went and researched it. But even if the average person would have gone, even if the average person made some effort, they probably would have just gone to AI and said, "Is this a real photograph?" And AI would have said no, and that would have been the end of their. Because why would you? For the most part, even though we know it makes mistakes, you would think, "Oh, this picture, they know whether it's real or not." So, are we now moving into a completely different place where our ability to even do the research is going to be difficult?
Yeah, I think what worries me are the resources to do that research, as well as the inclination to do that research. I think that particular story that you told, nutshells the whole thing completely as to where we are now. Sort of AI was leading you down into sort of the weeds, and a party of journalists used research skills to actually check the truth of this. And I mean, one of the things that has always encouraged me is that, and this has a long history, is how journalists themselves are often the ones who raise awareness of sort of serious transgressions in their own profession. The fact that sort of an editor or a photographer or a publisher might sort of apply their enhanced experience and skills to sort of say, this doesn't sound right, is, I feel, encouraging. But I think we are at a fork in the road right now. It could go either way, and one just has to hope that the good people prevail, because there is an important place for photography and for photojournalism in helping us understand conflict. What photography can't do is prevent conflict. It can shape perceptions so that others steer away from it. But I mean, one has to be reasonable about what conflict photography can and can't achieve. But we do need these images, and we do need these reports, and we need platforms that can be trusted, that we can access, and yeah, that is, I think, all I can do as a curator is sort of hold up a mirror to what's happened in the past, and where we are now. Be honest about what is not known as well as what we do know. So there is an awful lot about Iran, for example, that we do not know, and we will not know. And what tends to happen is that over time, the truth gradually comes out, but it may be quite a while. And one of the roles that I've been engaged in is actually regularly reassessing what we think we know and what we understand about the photographs that have survived to this time. So, the Roger Fenton photograph of called Death Valley, the question of whether or not he or his assistant staged the placement of the cannonballs in the road has been, there's been some new research in recent years which has gone into huge detail, but it's convincing. The same with the very famous photograph, The Falling Man by Robert Capa. Again, really detailed, time-consuming, dedicated research by a number of people. Yes, we are now fairly clear that that photograph of the falling man did not actually take place, was not taken in a combat zone.
Yeah, and now it exists more as a symbol, and so on. But,
I think, I always feel that, Don McCullin has grasped the essence of it when he talks about the photograph of the North Vietnamese soldier with his possessions that Don took in Hue in 1968. So he photographed the body of this young soldier, and Don arranged the possessions, staged the photograph for the camera. And he has always been very open about why he did that and how he did that. I think, that's an example of what I would suggest is the kind of value, the integrity in telling a story. If you manipulate a photograph, why did you do it? And how did you do it? And sometimes the result is that you can take your audience with you because you're telling a greater truth, if you like, or you are conveying a message which will resonate without that manipulation.
I think absolutely this is a great example, and I think it's a great lesson for not only the young photographers listening and watching this, but for all of us, that transparency along with the correct metadata, caption, explanation is always the way to go. If he had said that, oh, I just found this that way, it's a totally different image. It's a totally different everything. But there's absolutely no reason why, as long as you explain it properly and show the world what you're doing, it's legitimate.
Yeah. I mean, metadata is probably not the most exciting thing to spend your time on, but I can tell you from a curator's point of view, I mean, it is crucially important. When you are assessing millions of photographs, as I used to do in my role at IWM, I mean, a huge number of photographs used to come over my desk. And those without a caption, by and large, I won't say useless, but were of very limited use, because you knew that to actually find out what they actually showed and authenticate them would take an enormous amount of resource, which wasn't accessible. So, and digital photography, if I received digital photography where the metadata had all been stripped out, censored, that sent warning bells ringing for me. Why has that data been removed? What's, it's a red flag. So, the first thing I would do is sort of look at the state of the metadata. The second thing I would do is sort of look at, sort of analyze what had been done to the image in terms of post-processing, and then try and form a judgment on the relative significance of the image based on what I knew. These days, the AI is capable of doing that. Do we depend on it?
That's that's another whole other question, whole other panel, and so on. Fiona, was there any other questions from the audience that you wanted to bring across?
Yeah, let's bring in the latest one from Susanna, and that's perhaps our last question of the evening. So let's just bring this up onto the screen. So what about the fact that photojournalists are paid each year less and that we're not able to do our work anymore? What about the compromises that we have to do in order to hope to sell a photograph and gain an income that as a freelancer will be able to pay the insurance or a fixer or your bills? Is the editorial system that needs to change?
The age of the internet also undermined the traditional business model for photojournalism. I'm not really qualified to comment or offer solutions on that, but I do feel that if photojournalism is not supported, then we are in danger of going into a very dark hole. So, I understand the anxiety, but I suspect, Ron, you probably have more of a sense of whether there's any change or in the field of photojournalism today that will help young people coming forward.
When I started in 1988, the cover of a famous photo magazine, American Photo, the cover of it was "Is Photojournalism Dead?" And that was so. We as an industry have gone through many changes, and it's always over and always. It was always better before, and so on. And sometimes, yes, some things, of course, were better, but I think that the editorial system to change is not. We can't change it. I know it's not realistic, and you have to be smart and change with it. The one thing that, in terms of this particular question, when you say the word compromise, there are no compromises within the world of photojournalism. There are the rules from the beginning, the ethical rules, the rules not to set things up without saying anything, changing things, manipulating things, both during production and post production. All those things remain true. You have to hold true to your work. You have to be able to defend your work, and you have to be able to say, this is what I saw. This is my, not objective but fair representation of what I am seeing, and this is what happened. And that's going to be the core part of any work that you do as in the realm of photojournalism, and that should never change, for sure.
I mean, I would also add to that, a key thing is to be able to present your work to a potential publisher in a way that it's about sort of developing an empathy for the situation that the publisher is in, and making sure that your presentation takes that into account. So, sort of, if you are taking hard news to a fashion magazine, would you present it in the same way? No, but I think taking the time to do your research into potential publishers, developing communication skills, being able to be confident in explaining concisely what your work is all about. You do have to be prepared to tailor your presentation to the person or people that you're speaking to. They will appreciate that you've taken the effort to do that. And the other element is, I would say, sort of, build your networks. Don't expect miracles overnight. Get to know people. Some of the exhibition projects that I did at the Imperial War Museum with photographers today were the result of years of dialogue, during which time the photographer's practice might evolve considerably. And so understanding who you're working with, developing those collaborations, having a to and fro with people in the field, all of this helps grease the wheels. As a freelancer, it can be very lonely, and there are lots of ups and downs. Freelance conflict photographers, I take my hat off to you all, because it's really it's not an easy profession and you need to be able to have a whole raft of skills which perhaps other photojournalists covering other subjects might not need. So safety courses, making sure you have the right kit, and if you don't have those in place, don't go, because you're putting not only yourself at risk but potentially other people as well. Don't see conflict photography as the launch pad for your career. These are all tips based on years of experience, regardless of what the technology or the conflict may be. Often those that go to conflict without an understanding of what it entails, there can be long-term health issues that arise from that, mental as well as physical. So, if conflict photography is going to be your thing, do take the time to make sure that your head is in the right place, that your body is fit and capable of dealing with it, and that all the other elements are in place before you even pick up a camera.
Good advice. Thank you. So how are we doing, Fiona?
I think we're out of time now, but thank you so much, Hilary. We so appreciate you joining us and for sharing your incredible work. Every success to you with the book as well. And as you say, I'm sure there's ample more that could be added to it already. So we look forward to the next installment when it comes out.
Yeah, might be a little while. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Very timely as always, and also for all photographers, I think it's important to know where we came from, what's been done in the past, in order to understand the present and the future. So please get this book. There's a lot of value in it, and it's well worth it. Thank you all for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next event.